Hey guys, today we're talking about how dangerous racing motorcycles really is and what can you do to make it safer. Stay tuned, the next 2 weeks some really interesting videos are coming out. Thursdays at 2 p.m. Central my videos come out, so check back next week and the week after. So I want to start by saying that motorcycle racing is dangerous. People do die, people do get seriously injured, and so it's nothing to joke about. It's nothing to take lightly, but I think people get a warped sense of the danger because you don't hear about the 1,000 club races that go down without a hitch. You hear about the one where somebody dies, and that makes all the news headlines, and people, non-motorcycle riders, see those and think, oh, this must happen all the time because of those headlines. But in my experience, that's not true. Obviously, things happen. Be safe riding a motorcycle. But in my experience, it's rare that injuries occur when somebody crashes. People do crash more on track days and in racing than they do riding on the street, just because you're pushing the bike to the limit. So mistakes happen. If you make a small mistake when you're on the limit, it matters a whole lot more than if you make a mistake when you're putting around town well within your limit. But the crashes that happen on the street generally have far bigger consequences than those that happen on track. So on track, you might crash at 50 miles an hour, slide off the track into the grass, and you're fine, or you sprain your wrist or something. On the street, you make a mistake and crash, and you're going to slam into a curb, into a car, etc. And you're probably not wearing as much gear on the street. And so the stakes are far higher for what's going to happen if you crash on the street. And so you might be surprised how many people crash during track days and racing, but the injuries it's relatively rare that somebody gets injured. When they do, it's usually a collarbone, maybe a concussion, although that's kind of rare. Breaking ribs, but that's kind of rare. Spraining a wrist, things like that. So in my experience, it's rare that somebody gets seriously injured. It does happen. Again, obviously it happens. There have been several, like Moto3 and the World Supersport 300, several young kids that have been killed this year, which is tragic and heartbreaking. But that gives a warped perspective on how often that does actually happen at all levels of racing. So given that information, what can I do to make my track riding safer? I would say 3 things that are most important are getting the right gear, which it can be hard to know what's good and what's bad, but quality helmet, gloves, suit, and boots are imperative. So starting from the top, the helmet, I would highly recommend an FIM certified helmet. They're very pricey. You're probably going to be paying $800 at least for an FIM certified helmet, but if it saves you from a concussion, it's well worth it. My next big purchase is going to be an FIM certified helmet and an airbag suit, which is the next thing I would highly recommend, is an airbag suit that can save you from so many injuries. From collarbone breaking, it can, if you're coming down on your shoulder, it'll pad your shoulder so that it's not so much force pushing your collarbone together and snapping that. It inflates here so that your neck doesn't have much movements, greatly reduces the risk of whiplash or breaking your neck or something like that. It pads your chest so you're not going to break ribs. It pads your back so you're not going to break your back as easily. It is a wonderful invention, and it has saved so many, probably so many lives, but so many injuries because of that cushion. And so I highly recommend getting an airbag suit. And then the gloves, you want good gloves that aren't going to disintegrate, that have sliders on them, so that if you try to reach out to catch yourself, your hands are going to slide out. You don't want to be reaching out to catch yourself, which we'll talk about that in a sec. But then lastly, the boots. You want good quality boots that have good support, that won't let your ankle, fold up, rotate. any which way. You don't want that. You don't want a foot peg coming in and puncturing your foot or your ankle. So you want good quality boots for sure. Alpinestars boots are good. Forma boots are good. See what's available, but get something good quality. For the suit and gloves, I highly recommend Bison. They are sponsoring me, but I was a regular full price paying customer before I was a sponsored rider. That is true of all my sponsors. I was a regular full price customer before my sponsorship ever went through. It's important to me to only recommend things that I personally would buy in your situation, and Bison suit and gloves are those. And so make sure your gear is top notch and you can avoid lots of injuries. So that's number one, is get good gear. Number two, I would say, is avoid crashing, which is obvious, but some ways you can avoid crashing. Don't go out every session and just push the limit, try to break your record, try to blast around the track. Just dial it back a notch. Do what you're comfortable with and just push, try to push for 1/10 of a second faster this lap, 1/10 of a second faster that lap. And you'll improve a lot over time. But if you go out and say, I'm going to break my lap record by 10 seconds, then you're going to crash. You're going to make a mistake. There's no way you can step up that far instantly. And so just try incremental improvement. You don't want to try to blow yourself out of the water. If you do crash, there are ways of crashing better than others. So that's the third thing, is knowing how to crash. So if you're blowing through a corner, you're going to go on the grass and you know that there's no way of saving it, then my recommendation is brake as hard as you can, and right before you reach the grass, release those brakes. If you brake at all when you're on the grass, you're going to go down. It's just, there is no grip, especially if the grass is wet and muddy, but even if it's dry, those slicks just have no grip at all. And so release those brakes, try to keep the bike upright. If there's a wall, that you're heading towards, then grab the front brake and let it wash out and go down. But if there's any way that you can possibly recover it, then do that, and don't put on the brakes. I've gone off track probably 10 times at least, in situations that, had I been braking, I absolutely would have gone down. I would have crashed, bike would have tumbled. Some of those crashes would have been really high speed. I've gone off the track at like 90 miles an hour before, coming out of a turn, and there was just nothing I could do, so I just stood it up and rode it out. And there were tire ruts. I was bouncing all around. The bike was shimmying, but I kept it up. And if you are not on the brakes, then that's possible to do. But if you brake, there's no chance you're going to save it. So don't brake on the grass unless you have to put it down because you're heading towards a wall. The other thing is, when you do hit the ground, know how to fall. You ideally want to just go limp and just let whatever happens. Let your body limp and go across the track, go across the grass, whatever. When you try to reach out and catch yourself, you're going to be breaking your wrist, you're going to be breaking collarbones, breaking shoulders, you're going to be, all sorts of messed up. There's no chance of you catching yourself in a crash when you're going that fast. And so just let it happen. Just go limp. If you have to do something, then you can put your hands up here, like cross your arms. But that's not as good as just going limp. But what you definitely don't want to do is try to reach out and catch yourself. I guess the fourth thing of my 3-part list is make sure the track organization, the race or track day organization that you're riding with, make sure they're reputable. They have an ambulance on scene. They don't let people on track when the ambulance leaves. There are plenty of corner workers, so you're not going to be sitting out on track for an hour before someone notices you. Those are really important. I would say like 95% of track organizations have really good medical care, plenty of staff. They're really reputable companies, but there are some bad apples. Again, I won't name any names, but just do your research. There are some sketchy ones, but for the most part, they're really good. And that's part of the reason why riding on track is generally so much safer than riding on the street. There's far less chance of sitting out on the road waiting for an hour for an ambulance or 30 minutes for an ambulance. When you crash at the track, there's one on site ready to go just at a moment's notice. So if you crash, the corner worker waits 5 seconds, and if you don't get up, red flag the session and send the ambulance like that. So you might be waiting 2 minutes tops after you crash to get medical care, and that's huge. That can save so many injuries, just getting that immediate medical care. So anyway, that's kind of my experience of what are some dangers of riding on track, what are some ways of making it safer. So stay tuned. The next 2 weeks there will be some really exciting videos, but thanks for watching. See you next time.